Thanks for everyone for coming today. This is really, I think we're very fortunate to have such a stellar panel here, and I think the topic is really interesting. You know, storytelling in America using an international lens. And besides that fluffy bio, most of my time is spent working on international issues, either for multinational corporations or with NGOs, civil society, and others. I've spent a lot of time. I've lived internationally for Edelman in Europe and worked throughout Europe and the Middle East. So I know the challenges that are presented when you look at this particular topic. So I'm really keen to learn from the guys here how they're approaching it, because I think the other thing we know, just in general, communications is constantly changing. So it'll be interesting to see what's working and maybe what isn't, so I can learn how to do this. So rather than me read another one of those sappy bios, what I wanted to do was ask each one of the panelists to introduce themselves and tell me how did you end up here? So with that, maybe we'll start from my left.
Great.
Carrie.
Good morning, everyone. I guess we're in that afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Carrie Rich. I'm the CEO and co-founder of the Global Good Fund, which is a 3-year-old nonprofit organization that exists to identify high-potential young leaders throughout the world and accelerate their personal development for social impact through entrepreneurship. I came here today with the idea of sharing with you really what's working and what hasn't worked in the startup environment from a nonprofit global standpoint. Global Good Fund supports 50% domestic entrepreneurs, so it could be anywhere in the United States, and the other 50% could be anywhere in the world, largely Latin America, Africa, and Asia. My background is health administration, so I previously worked at Inova, leading brand communications in the Leadership Institute, Inova Health System in Northern Virginia, and prior to that was working in architecture.
Hello everyone, my name is Mame Annan-Brown. I'm the Chief of Communications at Results for Development Institute, a Washington DC based, we consider ourselves a think and do tank. And we focus in countries, Africa, Latin America, and Asia primarily. And we have a very ambitious mission, which I think a lot of our colleagues here on the panel have, is to really look at some of the tough global development challenges in the world and help our partners and our funders solve for those. And so work in areas focused primarily in global health and also in global education. And I think the other piece is career-wise. I think a lot of us are looking at the next 5 to 10 years of your career. I started in the private sector, so I worked on Wall Street. That was my first job for 10 years at JP Morgan. And in that time period, I was a senior advisor to a number of the business executives in the investment bank, and ended up leading and creating the charitable giving and philanthropy program for the investment bank. And then after that, took a segue, moved to Washington and joined a advocacy organization, one of the largest in the US, focused on genocide and mass atrocities, and was their first director of marketing. And then a few years later, found Results for Development Institute, where I sort of brought in my passion for global development issues. So really looking forward to sharing experience and connecting with the audience, with you all.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Paige Alexander. I'm the Assistant Administrator at the U.S. Agency for International Development. I covered the Middle East and North Africa, but for the previous 4 years, I actually covered Europe and Eurasia. So I think I hit on the places that you all do not. Before being at AID, I was actually at IREX, International Research and Exchanges Board, which is an international nonprofit, and that's where, as Peter mentioned, we had been clients because we had an employee who was taken in Iran. So I used that communication and what I learned from talking to folks at Edelman to recognize exactly where the balance is between a nonprofit needing to communicate a message of a terrible situation. And then now at AID, what I do is primarily try to explain to you all as taxpayers exactly what you're getting for your 1% of the federal budget that goes into foreign aid. So we'll talk about different platforms we use and work we do. But before that, I worked at a university, and I worked with Mott Foundation, Oak Foundation, and Soros Foundation. So one thing I would say as far as how the hell I got here is through very circuitous routes that I think are interesting boxes to check along the way, so you have an appreciation for what the other side does and everything that you do.
Thank you, Jere, for having us. Thank you, Edelman, for having us here. My name is Aaron Sherinian. Hello. I run communications and marketing for the UN Foundation. And we're an organization that wants to bring people together and connect them with the big issues that the UN works on. So our principal mandate is to raise awareness and raise the volume and raise some hell and raise some money and raise things so that people are able to get the stories they need about what we believe are the most important stories of our time. So our job is a storytelling job in a lot of ways that moves policy and brings people together into global issues. How we get here, I love that question about how we get here. And as I was listening to each of your stories, I thought, yeah, I kind of got there this way and I kind of did this way. But I began my career insisting that I was going to be a diplomat. I was going to go tell the story of the US government around the world and help tell it the other way. And I was a Foreign Service officer for 10 years and loved it, loved every single second of it. And then I left and I went to run public relations for a US government agency called the Millennium Challenge Corporation, whose mission it is to align with many of the missions here at the table to help build economic prosperity around the world by reducing poverty through large-scale infrastructure. But before that, I worked in marketing, and I think at the end of the day, regardless, I think we're always all in public relations. And those of us in the room, whether or not you have PR in your title or comms in your title, I think that in Washington, D.C. Is what we're actually all doing, and that's what got me here to this point. I've been following the UN Foundation because it was led by a dynamic woman, a leader in this space who believes in communications. Her name is Kathy Calvert. And so I've been following her work. She's someone who's known to many of you in the room. And I decided, to be frank, I knew I wanted to work with her. And the opportunity came up, and I've never regretted a minute of that. So that's a little bit of my story. Look forward to talking to you one day.
Great. Well, maybe kick it off and talk a little bit about, I think, Aaron, you hit on something interesting. You talked about communications, but also about storytelling. And I think our feeling at Edelman is that we're now in a period in time where you can no longer just push the message out and walk away from it. You really got to wrap a story around it. But then adding to that, layering over that, maybe you and Paige can comment on this. When you develop the story, but now you got to roll it out. So you're not just rolling it out to the U.S. Sometimes you are, but you're telling it through the lens of an international, sort of perspective. So how do you guys deal with that? Developing the story, but then figuring out how am I going to communicate this across multiple markets, languages, cultures? Maybe Aaron, start with you and Paige.
Well, I was hoping Paige would tell us the truth, but I'll start with one example. For my government days, if I can, I think Mame's probably got some great stories here. I'm a huge fan of everyone that's around the panel. I just came here to listen. But I will never forget when we were doing stories, when I was in my U.S. government days working with the Millennium Challenge Corporation. We had some brilliant people that we worked with, people who are still there that I love. And we decided, let's package the story so neatly so that they could be used cross-platform and cross-culture. Let's stop writing for an American audience and then for a Ugandan audience. Let's write something that is in an era of social media, ready to go for everyone. And we made a mistake, and I think we need to be sharing a couple more mistakes. Now we'll talk about this later on. But we were tying up the story so neatly that they were becoming a little bit diluted is the word I want to use, because there were political sensitivities in the audience you're working with. And I think that for storytelling, I had a great colleague, and she looked me in the face and she said, stop trying to tie it up so neatly, Aaron. Let's let the stories be a little rougher around the edges, and let's leave more questions in them. So the analogy I use, my mom's a quilter. I don't know if any of you do quilting, but she has those things called bias edges. The corners are super neat, they're gorgeous, and the storytellers that I was working with, two women, in fact, I wish they were here today because I'd call them out, love them. They said, let's leave the edges rough, and let's talk about the questions we don't know. Let's talk, instead of packaging everyone as nice and neat, we don't have to tell the story of Juanita, the social entrepreneur in Mexico, and make it look like her life is wonderful and she's happy. I got U.S. government money, or I'm working on my thing. No, let's talk about the struggles in her life. Let's let the stories be rough around the edges, and that's what will help them be shared more organically and ask more questions about what our mission is, et cetera. So that for me is one of the things that I've learned, and I'm here with one of my colleagues from UNF. Raise your hand, Zane. This is Zane. Everyone wants to work for Zane. So please go meet Zane if you're here, and if you have scarves on, go meet Zane. But one thing that we've learned is that the best stories for us are the stories that leave something to the imagination, but also that leave something out there that's rough, and that show that there's something still to be chapter 2 and chapter 3 of the stories to be discovered.
Yeah, and as Aaron was saying, they tied it up so nicely. I was thinking, oh no, you can't do that. With a cross-cultural audience, you can't have just one message. And so I think the real issue is not only knowing the audience, but knowing who the messenger is. Because from the U.S. government perspective, and again, I work in the Middle East, we're not often the best messengers for the message of what the West has done right and what the Middle East needs to do better. So knowing your audience is a really important piece of it, and making sure that the message is being delivered correctly. I think we had the same issue when we had worked with Edelman, and we had this employee, and again, this is my nonprofit days, when we had the employee who had been taken. It wasn't that we as our organization had a big voice. Edelman taught us how to have the voice. It taught us how to make the presence known of a woman who was essentially a church secretary in Armenia and suddenly had been taken in Iran. She didn't know, probably more than 40 people in her life, and suddenly she had 10,000 people who had signed on to a petition because we had made her a real person online, and so it really attracted other followers, and that was able to influence policy because they recognized that this was not a good message that Iranians wanted to be giving, is that they were just taking church secretaries. So it's trying to find what the true story is and how it will hit an audience and most effectively be a change maker in discussion.
So on that comment, for you, one of the challenges, I think, so you figure out the story. How do you tell that story in America to make it resonant? It's a busy space, particularly when we're talking about the type of things that you guys, the field you're working in. There's a lot of competing voices. So I'm sitting in Middle America, and you're telling me a story about development needs in Africa or Indonesia, and it's like, why do I care? How do you make it resonant?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question. I think that the headline here, if you take anything away, is nuance matters, right? Nuance matters. But I'd love to give you an example. I think one of the proudest moments in my career, I think one of the most humbling, is, just paint a quick picture. So 2009, the Obama administration is about to release their Sudan policy to help stop the violence in Sudan. And the organization I was working with, United to End Genocide, had 800 student activists who were coming to Washington for a conference. And we said, how do we tell the story of genocide in Darfur in a way that senators, so we were targeting senators like Senator Boxer, Senator Feingold, how do we raise the visibility of this issue? So what we did was we took 800 students and gave them flip cameras. And we put them in a hotel. And we partnered with Witness, which is one of the biggest video advocacy organizations who pioneered a lot of video advocacy 10 years ago. And we paired them together and they mentored. They recorded 500 videos. And those videos were taken to lobby politicians on Capitol Hill that week. And so I think this is an example of telling a story from an international story from a domestic perspective through the voice of people who care domestically. And where did that lead? I mean, the win there, what was the win? That next week, for the first time in history at the White House, our student president was invited for a Q&A with Samantha Power and Gratian, who was the special envoy for Sudan. It was YouTube live, the first time the White House had broadcast on YouTube, streamed live. And then 3 months later, the president noticed, because he'd seen some of these videos, and he gave a speech on Holocaust remembrance and noted the student movement as a driving force in sort of genocide prevention. So I think that the nuance and making it personal and also making it domestic, I think is a key strategy. Yeah.
That's a great. I love that nuance, man. I agree with that. One of the things, Edelman at our heart, we're a big firm, we've been around a long time, but at our heart, we're a consumer marketing firm. And so much of what our focus is on the consumer side, and we're talking about products, is millennials. So how are we going to get that? That's the holy grail. You want to get them so that when they get older and get more money, they'll buy your stuff or they'll support your issue. But a lot of what you're doing, Carrie, has to do with focusing on youth entrepreneurs. When you talk about storytelling or just communications in general, are there any different tacks that you need to take when you're really focused, or tactics when you're focused on that youth marketer, that youth area?
Yes, and the first thing I say is we're still figuring that out, but I was picking up on some of the trains of thought that the other panelists have shared, and the difference from a global good fund standpoint is we're starting from nothing. There's no track record like the UN or UN Foundation, to point at. And millennials as individuals, but also the organizations they represent, there's a lot more people launching their own enterprises and opportunities to both create a persona as an individual and on behalf of the organization or company. So a couple of points there. One of the earliest things we did, and this picks up on Aaron's point, was to publish our failures annually. So throughout the year, we collect a list, which is quite long, of all of our failures as an organization. So usually weekly, I'm collecting things we've done that we could do better. And then around Thanksgiving, we publish a newsletter of gratitude to our entire support network, highlighting our top 3 failures and how grateful we are that the community stays engaged. So for instance, it might be something as internal as a CRM, a customer relations management system, that we picked the wrong one to start, and we failed in selecting the right system, but we caught that early and chose to migrate to a different system, and now look where we are today. So it's highlighting a failure in a context that's helped the organization advance since then, and really being transparent and honest with our community as we build the company. I think secondly, from the relevance standpoint, what makes it relevant to millennials, we're offering people, whether they're within a company or external to existing companies, the opportunity to translate their business success into social significance. And that message resonates quite well with baby boomers as well as millennials. Particularly millennials want an opportunity to translate the skills that they have into something that's socially significant, and if they're not finding that at work, they're very intrigued to come provide those skills through the Global Good Fund.
We may have stumbled onto something here. So now when our crisis slides come, you screwed up and we're going to make it public.
Yeah.
I don't know if that'll work or not, but we'll try it. One of the other challenges that I look down at that end of the table is, I think, we're all faced with this, whether it's, governments we're working with or with big multinational companies, there's a lot of bureaucracy, and which can impede storytelling. Now I know that the U.S. government is streamlined, it's like a race car, but UN's not so good. But at AID, how do you get the story out the door in a timely fashion? Because that's sometimes bureaucracy can just be, overwhelming. So
True. My colleague here knows what the bureaucracy is like. It's even to speak at something like this, you often have to get your talking points cleared. But we actually have the ability, being a development agency as opposed to State Department, we have the ability to take a story that is happening and use our partners on the ground. For example, although AID does a lot of this ourselves, the reality is that the international NGOs and contractors that work with AID do the lion's share of the work. They have a whole new platform that is not required to go through an aid mechanism for approval on what they put on the website. So they are the best storytellers. They're closest to the ground. We have our aid missions in each country, but the contractors and grantees we work with actually are working directly with people. And so they can take those stories and they can expand them. Then they show them to us, and we try, as West Bank Gaza with an olive farmer, and the work that the olives that are being grown between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and the trade that is happening is huge. And so that's a message of peace building, and that's something I can take back to Capitol Hill, because they, you have groups that are very supportive of the Israeli cause and don't necessarily see the Palestinian relationship and how this is actually economic development as part of the peace building process. So you take that story, look for that target of opportunity, and the contractor or the grantee that's running that project is very much out there with the story, and then I can take it to a different level. And so sometimes you're hitting the stories at very different levels. I should also say, as far as streamlining the process, you have to find the targets of opportunity, like the Boko Haram situation. When girls were taken, AID was already working on a Let Girls Learn campaign that Kim Kardashian had tweeted out, and it speaks to a number of different generations, the importance of having girls learn. Well, First Lady Michelle Obama has now picked that up, and I think everyone knows because of Boko Haram and because of Nahala and the issues that you've seen in the press, it's sensitized people to this issue. And so you take that issue that has become a public one, you talk about the work you're doing, and then you hope it's going to resonate. So we're very happy the White House picked that up and is taking it, and Kim Kardashian, of course, we're happy she picked it up. So it's far a different audience than we would normally talk to. So.
Aaron, what about the UN? When you're, first of all, if you try to emulate a little bit what Paige is talking about there, getting that local voice, that local perspective, and then secondly, how nimble can you be? What we're trying to do more up here is being opportunistic. You write the plan at the beginning of the year, and then sometimes the environment doesn't cooperate. So you've got to be opportunistic. So working in an organization like the UN Foundation, is that something you try to do as a challenge?
So I want to speak as the organization, but I also want to speak some truth just as a person with some Beltway years, if I can for a second, because I think we need WWPR in this room. We need a culture change. And we finally, in this city, I think we have some people who realize that there need to be marketing dollars, we're going to call it that, marketing dollars behind anything we do. If we want to talk to Congress or the US or support, we're all fundraisers, let's be honest, right? So finally Washington's realized you need some marketing dollars, but we have a problem here because we are a city made up of organizations, and the UN Foundation supports the UN, which definitely has bureaucracy within it. I may not need to tell anyone on the panel about, or any of you about, we live in a city that suffers from acronymitis. So the problem we have is this: we go to a movie, and the movie starts, and it says, the movie's already started, right? Touchstone Pictures brings you, and there's already Tom Cruise on there, and there's a picture of a scene, in conjunction with the Weinstein brothers, and then it continues. Brought to you by Blue Box Productions, with special producer by. You know how they bring you the credits, but you're already in the story? We have a tolerance for that because Hollywood's figured out a way for us to get credit while we're already in the story. And chances are they started in a shower scene or a tension scene or a quick explosion that got our attention. But we in Washington, we do this thing where we say, no offense to anyone here, thanks to the amazing work of GNOP office of XDOC3 in conjunction with blah, 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 brought to you by Chemonics, in conjunction with, we're so worried about getting everyone's credit up at the beginning of the storytelling, that the story is so boring by the end. And we have to do it too. I mean, we're faced with the same problem because we're all trying to justify our marketing dollars. We're trying to get our grantees and our offices acronyms up there and credit the story. So I think all of us would do well to just take a page from Hollywood, start telling the story and get the credit later. But I think we're all feeling this pressure to get our bureaus' names up there. It's hard. It's hard to do because you want your boss to see, boss, you say it's up front and center, we got the story in there. But the powerful brands, and Edelman does this so well, the powerful brands just tell the story, and then you'll wait for the credits at the end. You'll wait to see who's brought to you by. So I don't know if that's answering your question, but we need a culture change in DC where we can say to our bosses, trust me, the story is great, they'll wait for the credits. We don't have to get all these acronyms up at the beginning of the story because no one cares at the end, and we're getting bored by it. So the UN Foundation, to answer the story, what we tried to do is we believe in lifting up the champions and the messenger. That's the best way to get it done. So, for example, we work a lot with making sure that people have access to vaccines around the world. It's a huge issue. It's a sensitive issue for some people, but millions of people around the world want to get their kids vaccinated. They don't have access to it. So we decide that we're going to lift up the champions who tell that story locally, whether it's the mom or dad in the US, or the health worker that's working out there, or whether it's the UN, dedicated, passionate UN person that's able to see what happens when a vaccine gets into the life of a person. If we focus on the messenger, or we focus on the champion, that's an easy way to get all your acronyms and all your credit in fast, because it comes at the end. But if you focus on the person, that's the way to kind of break through some of that storytelling gobbledygook that gets us in the way of our storytelling. And the second thing we love to do is we love to pair the person in the US on Main Street, USA, with the person in the main plots in Maputo. And that sounds inauthentic, but there's always a connection. There's always somebody that's made the connection somewhere. And if you put two of those people in the same story, it tends to break down some of the bureaucracy, and it allows your storytellers to get through what you're trying to say a little bit more. So I hope you heard in there. I just try to take advantage of it, Jere. There's a call to action in there somewhere. If you figured it out, please email me or tweet me or talk to Zane, because we're trying to figure out ways to get past this, what do we call it? What do I call it anymore? Acronymitis that we suffer from. We're all acute sufferers of acronymitis. We'd love to figure out a way to just get stories told so we don't have to suffer from that anymore.
Great. when you think about storytelling, and Mame and Carrie, like to hear your thoughts. You know, there's a story, then there's a platform, and you know, just in the last 5 years, look at, I mean, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, whatever, who knows what's next. You know, how are you guys using different platforms, and particularly the, you know, we talked a little bit earlier about sub-Saharan Africa, where, you know, not too long ago you had to wait 4 years to get a telephone. Well, now they just hopped over to all this technology, and everybody's got a mobile. You know, everybody's got a mobile. So anyway, can you talk a little bit about how you're using those platforms and Carrie, let's leave your close.
Sure. So Results for Development, this is a great question. We have a project where we're looking at how mobile money can drive financial transactions in Africa. And so to your point, I mean, if you think about technology, I was reading this staggering statistic, every 11 seconds a Twitter account is opened in the world. And in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, particularly in Kenya, 68% of the population is on some sort of mobile device. So at Results for Development, we said, how do we empower people on the ground in these countries to use mobile technology to lift themselves out of poverty? And you know, Bill Gates said, you know, by 2030, you know, 1/3 of the population is going to be on mobile devices, and we need to empower them. So it's certainly a big issue. What we're doing is we're trying to tell the stories of successful enterprises in Africa that are using mobile technology to bank the population. So there's the unbanked and the banked. And the unbanked population are not able to feed their families. They're storing money under their mattresses because they don't have a bank account. They can't support their businesses. So what we've done is we're telling the stories of successful enterprises in mobile banking. One really fantastic example in Kenya, actually. I don't know if you've heard of the disorder. It's called fistula. After you've had a child, you might become incontinent, and you have issues. And so there was a population in Kenya that was needing these services, hospital services, but didn't have the funds in a bank account to pay for them. So women were dying. And so we partnered with USAID for this project. It's called the HFG project. And we went in and said, how do we bring mobile technology to this pilot, this group? So fast forward about a few years working on this project, that pilot group who have been banked, 60% of the intervention that was studied are now, they're surviving, right? They're surviving. So to answer your question, more specifically, mobile is where we're going. But in sub-Saharan Africa, mobile is a way of life. It is survival. And so we're getting behind that issue because we're trying to tackle tough development challenges and use technology. But it's a scary proposition. One other interesting fact I want to share is that Forbes recently put out a report about where technology is going in the 21st century. And they said that in the next 10 years, we're going to have smart washing machines. 10 to 15 years is an image of a washing machine that's talking to you. That's frightening. But at the same time, and productive, right, for all of us, but at the same time, I think that there's a lot of promise in technology, but particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, it's like I said, it's livelihoods that we're going to be saving with this type of initiative. So,
Carrie, what about you guys? How are you sort of using the new wave of technology?
Yeah, so we're very highly leveraging technology, largely because we have to, because it's a small team of people and we're reaching out to a global audience. So for example, a couple of ways that we use technology. One is to identify entrepreneurs around the world and let them know that the Global Good Fund is here to support their personal development. We've more than doubled the number of applications annually to become a Global Good Fund Fellow solely through the use of social media. So we do have other ways of connecting with people through ambassadors that are on the ground in different regions of the world, and sharing pipelines with other organizations that might be funding earlier stage than the Global Good Fund, but purely tracking the number of applications generated through social media alone. We've reached about 1,300 this year for 12 slots for fellows at the Global Good Fund solely through social media. So that's a way that makes it the opportunity to receive support for personal leadership development accessible across the boards, particularly in parts of the world where women it's not socially acceptable for women to be investing in themselves or creating companies. So social media has played a big role in the Global Good Fund's ability to access emerging entrepreneurs. The second piece, and this actually gets back to the point that was made earlier from answering the question about bureaucracy, connecting different groups of people with each other. So we connect CEOs of anywhere from $40 million to $60 billion companies with emerging social entrepreneurs in one-on-one mentoring relationships. And that's the story we tell. We tell the story about the emerging entrepreneur who's incredibly passionate, has strong drive and work ethic, and is going to get there eventually, but that we're going to help create a platform to accelerate the growth of that individual so he or she can accelerate the business and impact society. And the way we do that is through a virtual platform that connects that young leader with an experienced business executive who can help be a catalyst for social good. I think the third way is just purely some of the examples of the businesses that we support. For instance, domestically, there's a company called Charity Miles. Again, Charity Miles, so I won't be offended if anyone downloads the free app at this point if you're taking out your phone, but it's a for-profit company, and what you do is every mile you exercise, whether it's walking, running, or biking, a company, let's say Nike, that's targeting an athletic audience, will donate its marketing dollars to a charity of your choosing for every mile you exercise. Again, this is a for-profit enterprise created by a high-potential young leader who said, I want to run marathons and get sponsored by companies, and after running 43 marathons and not receiving a single sponsorship because it was nowhere near the front of the pack, he said, how do I leverage society to make a social impact? And he used technology through a phone app to do that.
I think that's a great idea. We talked about this earlier, this notion of bridging social media for good. But the other thing is, they're using Nike. I'm not sure if that's a real example or not, but obviously Nike would want that information because they want that information so they can then get a hold of me and say, I know you like to run marathons, and by the way, we have these new running shoes that you would just absolutely have to have, and go around the corner, you can buy them at your local store. So, so I guess the question I have for that, maybe start with Aaron, is there anything wrong with that as we think about storytelling, working with, corporate entities where, there's no free lunch, we all know that. And I think if anybody is so altruistic and thinking that, well, they're doing for the good of mankind. Yes, but they're businesses as well. Do you guys have any challenges?
Yeah, if you think that working with corporate America to help solve global problems is a bad idea, then you're in the wrong century. Right? Because we know we can't get to it. We can't do it with just government money. We can't do it with the great social entrepreneurship communities out there. We need all of those connections. And I love that you were bringing up Charity Miles back. I think the founder of Gene might chagrin that I think I'm the poster child for that organization. I do not look like a Charity Miles guy. I have it. Download it. It's awesome. I love what it represents. Charity Miles is a perfect example. We at the UN Foundation, we love this. We love where big brands come in to help tell the biggest stories of our time. We have to be vigilant. So those of us here who represent organizations like the ones here, especially, right, when you have a .gov email address, you've got to be super vigilant. But any of us have to be careful that we're not overstepping boundaries, that we're not taking credit for things that are not due. But corporate America, or corporate reality of the 21st century means that we've got to have them at the table. So the world's coming up with a new to-do list. I don't know if you know this, but there's a new set of goals that's going to be adopted this year in September. They're called the Sustainable Development Goals, the new global #global goals. Check it out. You should be reading Global Daily if you're not right now. You should be reading Global Daily every morning. But there's going to be a new set of goals. And these goals out there are goals that are these successors or inheriting the Millennium Development Goals, which some of you have heard about. In each of those 17 goals, there's a perfect marketing opportunity for brand. Because brands are working on all of these issues. And I'm grateful that finally there's a way for brands to be able to ladder up a story that's authentic because it's based on data and measurement. So Nike isn't going to be accused of greenwashing or bluewashing something. Nike's going to be accountable to a target and goals. A social entrepreneur has a great idea, and they're the first ones that they think to have thought of it, but they're going to be accountable to targets and goals about how it works around the world. So I'm answering the question about corporate partnership because I think it puts everybody, it kind of levels the playing field in a way. My colleague from USAID is going to be accountable for the same global goals that Berkshire Hathaway or anybody else in any of their investments is going to be accountable to. So I like the fact that in 2015 we're setting out a new set of global goals that allows us to say, what are we laddering out to? Do you work on sanitation? Do you work on children's health? Do you have empowerment of girls and women? What are the issues that you work on? Rights and equality. Let's have a level playing field so that when you have a brand in front of you, a Nike, or another brand that might be a little bit more, maybe complicated to talk about, they're all accountable for the same goal. That makes it easier for us. But I do think we need to be vigilant when it comes to the discussion with corporate partnerships. At the UN Foundation, we adore working with Johnson & Johnson. We love them. They are so good. They're so good to talk about the health of girls and women around the world. But we both sides need to be vigilant about how we do that. We adore working with our partner Walgreens. When you get your flu shot at Walgreens, you're giving a kid a vaccine in a country around the world. A kid whose mom or dad couldn't get it for them. We love that, but we have to be vigilant to make sure that we're not crossing any lines, we're not crossing over to lines that they're in areas where they're overstating anything that might be with the UN. We have to be careful of those things. So I think it's a game we've got to be playing because the stakes are high, but the rules also have to be super clearly delineated so that what we're not doing is greenwashing or key-washing or doing any of those things that make it suspicious for the consumer. Because consumers are smart. They smell out something that is really overstatement. They smell out something very quickly that's inauthentic, and they respond very well to things that are about their core values. And I'll conclude with a comment here, but I do want to give a shout out to our host because America is a generous place. And so is the title, Storytelling in American. I don't know if that was a mistake or it was America or American. I love it, it's American. I think when we tell stories in American, it's because we're a generous country. We're a generous country. We love to give. We're one of the most generous countries in the world. And I think that we expect our brands to be just as generous as we are. And so I think that America's calling on those brands to step up and help the U.S. government, help USAID do the sorts of things the results it's doing, be a part of the social entrepreneurship movement.
I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, kind of just pivot off of that, your point that, for our bosses or our clients, and we've all been in this position where it's like, well, where's my commercial for the story, right? But adding on to that, Paige, love to get your thoughts on this. When we talk about storytelling, we're all communicators, we're creative types, we're supposed to be anyway. Sometimes, our clients or our boss will come to us and they'll lay out and blah, 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 and that's the story. Isn't that great? And you're sitting there with this goofy grin on your face because it's so how do you, and particularly in government, because it's hierarchy. So how do you take their nugget and put it in, package it into a story that will work with your target audience?
I can't answer the corporate one. Since you're tweeting this out, let's the nice thing is, although there is a hierarchy in government, I think the reality is human nature is something that everyone wants to do. It's their idea that's been internalized and moved on. So you often have to convince someone who comes to you with a really bad idea that they actually had a better idea. There was a nugget in their idea that could be, spun off in a different direction. I often say I'm the mother of 3 kids, and so it's like sort of raising kids as they come up with their brilliant idea, and you're like, that's really interesting. I see where you're trying to go with this, and you send them in a different direction because that's what you realize that the idea was bad. So I think, and don't tweet that out because the kids are all on Twitter. So
they're on.
But I think that there are a couple of elements here, both with the corporate side and with the how do you change, how do you be a change agent within your own administration or within your own structure to pivot a story or pivot something in a different direction. 2 things. One, I wanted to follow on what Aaron was saying, because the corporate side of it, there's something called the U.S. Global Leadership Campaign, USGLC, and it's a strange bedfellows coalition. And at some point, people realized when you looked around, you can get Boeing or Johnson & Johnson in the room with Bread for the World and Save Darfur, and actually everyone's trying to make America or Americans more knowledgeable about how being engaged internationally can help. And so they often, you'll see at USGLC, they'll come up with these ideas that you would never expect Boeing and Bread for the World to come up with together, but it's in both of their best interests. And so that means going out and being advocates for a certain storyline. And so coming back to the story, when somebody gives you a piece of information that you think could be an interesting story, you have to figure out, just like you did in school where you diagrammed out a sentence, how do you diagram this in a different direction? Well, that's interesting because you pointed out something that might appeal to the corporate side, but wouldn't appeal to the cultural and country side. So where do you find the nexus? And basically, you can talk anyone out of anything, and they'll think it's their idea at the end of the conversation. But you have to have a lot of patience, or be a psychology minor to figure out how to do it, or a mother. But it really, you can get people around to the idea, but you have to try to find something good in everything that comes to you. And I'm sure Edelman does this all the time, because you'll have a client who thinks they already have the world's greatest idea. And you're coming in with the knowledge that you have and what a good idea actually looks like. And so you just basically have to work with someone until you get to that good idea.
Every one of our clients starts off the conversation by saying, I want to own innovation. So you make the class. But anyways, I want to open it up to you guys, but I wanted to just ask each one of the panelists quickly. We talked a little bit about challenges in the past and what's going on today. But starting with you, Mame, as you look out 5 years from now in the field in which you all are operating and communication storytelling standpoint, what do you see as the big challenges, 1 or 2 or 3 challenges that we're going to be facing?
So absolutely. I mean, I think that number one, I already alluded to it, is this technology. And the pace of technology, the pace of the sort of rapid growth of technology in the countries that I focus on. How do we stay ahead? And how do we communicate to those populations that are rural, that are sort of unaccounted for, and sometimes they're voiceless, some of these communities. So how do we leverage technology to talk to the voiceless and to empower them? The second, I would say, is audience identification. Who is your audience? How do you identify them? Speaking about Edelman, I mean, some of the pros here, my organization worked with Edelman just this past year to do some stakeholder mapping, where we said, the magic word, stakeholder mapping. Who are you talking to? Who do you want to influence? And they did a fantastic job with that. But I think nonprofits, corporations, bilaterals, multilaterals, all face that challenge of really understanding who their audience is, especially in the international context. And then I think the last thing I would say is the challenge that my organization faces in sort of the think tank nonprofit space is the incredibly crowded market for funding, for donor funding. Bank of America recently put out a pretty stunning report and said that most nonprofits in the United States are 3 months away from the red. They've got 3 months in the bank. And so internationally, if you look at funders like Gates and others, we're competing for the same pot of money. And that significantly drives communication strategies. If you've got $10 million, if you've got $100 million, what can you do with your communication? So I would say that that's at the top of the list from my perspective. It's that shrinking donor funding, an incredibly crowded market where we all have something to say that's important. So those would be my 3.
Jerry, what about you? Any others to add to that?
Yeah, so picking up on the idea of the funding piece, I'd say from a global good fund standpoint, what we're seeing is a lot of hybrid business models. So meaning it's not just a nonprofit the way you traditionally think of a donor-driven model. It's not a traditional for-profit. It's some sort of hybrid model. And I can use the Global Good Fund as an example. We've been running a fellowship program for 3 years now and started getting knocks on the door from everyone from multinational corporations to nonprofit organizations that are global and domestic to individual entrepreneurs to higher education institutions saying, could we buy modules of your fellowship program? And we're thinking, well, let's not leave money on the table. Let's create a revenue stream to be sustaining the organization long term. That's a really different communication strategy and message and approach to communicate to an audience that's used to being asked for philanthropic dollars or grants perhaps. Or instead of pitching to a company to sponsor an event, how about you invest in growing your employees through the Global Good Fund? So I think these hybrid models the business structures influence the funding streams and influence how we communicate about our respective businesses. The other piece from my standpoint is, all these technology advancements and the hybrid business models don't trump the reality that the world rises and falls on leadership. And so at the end of the day, we need to be investing in leaders to run these enterprises and play key leadership roles, both domestically and around the globe.
Aaron?
I think that I agree and want to echo and kind of write with a highlighter around the issue about competition for resources and attention. But I think that's it's a problem, it's an opportunity, it's the ultimate opportunity for our sector. Right? Because we have to up our game. That's an opportunity that says you gotta up your game, because I don't believe that there's shrinking dollars. I think that we just have to find different ones. So I think that same study that you mentioned, Mame, I think shows that we all have to up our game when it comes to storytelling. We gotta let loose with some of our control issues. We all are control freaks as communications people. We gotta let it go. We gotta let other people tell our stories for us. I think that's the challenge. But I don't wanna lay it out there, and I don't know if it's get us in trouble with the Q&A section, and I wanna open up a wound. But I have a real problem because none of you wants to stay long enough. I'm just gonna be honest. I think it's a problem for us, because if we're gonna be good storytellers and we're audience and we're stakeholders, and if I as a boss, I really wanna go somewhere with you for a long time. I really do. And I have a problem. In general, I'm saying maybe I'm the problem too, because I'm not saying people have to stay for 30 years and get gold watches. But if we are gonna be so hard to stay put for more than 12 or 18 months, then your bosses are gonna stop investing in you, and you're gonna not be as good as you think you are at your job. So I'm just laying that out there as people who are in public relations, because none of us knows how to deal with it.
It's a challenge.
We're looking at it right now, but we have a real problem here, because to be really good at what you do, again, I'm not saying you have to make a Stradivarius violin for the rest of your life, and you should have good experiences from all around a sector or multiple sectors, but in this city, you really gotta know your stuff when you're talking about water and sanitation, or engagement with this particular issue. So I gotta say, I think that's a problem. I don't know if we're not talking about it. It's the elephant in the room. We should hug that elephant in the room, or we need to at least harness the elephant in the room or something, but it's out there.
And if anybody's keeping score, Aaron is leading on the most beautiful phrases of opportunity and acronym-ophobia. Paige, what about you? And then we'll open it up for
I'd be really interested in hearing the questions. So I do agree with Aaron. Sort of got caught up in that piece that, people used to make a job out of coming into the federal government. Now, we've hired 1,000 people at AID over the past 6 years, and our attrition rate is actually pretty high, because they come in, either there's a family life issue or their spouse can't get employment, and people leave. And I think that it is hard to make an investment in somebody if you think they're not going to be there to carry that message forward. I think as far as dialing for dollars or trying to find money, that also you're more sincere when you've had more time in a job and you're more comfortable. So you're a little less nervous about talking about the goods that you're trying to sell, or the project you're trying to sell. You really, people see that, they feel it, they hear it when you're sincere. And if you haven't been there that long, you're not going to be sincere. So you're less effective as a fundraiser, as a communicator, even as a program manager, because the people you're working with have dedicated their life to doing those type of programs. And suddenly you come in to micromanage them or be the great USAID overseer of something they've been working on, and they know you're gonna, you're coming late and you're gonna leave early. And so I think you really have to take chances. Everybody has to take a chance and just dive in with both feet and say, I'm gonna do this for the long haul, which might just be 2 or 3 years, but in sort of this generation, that's almost a long haul, and you are more effective at what you do for raising money and for telling the story.
Great. So, I'm going to turn it over to you guys. Anybody have any questions? Please.
Yes, hi. I'm Ambassador from the Layman Group. And when it comes to storytelling, they have to quantify that story, right? In addition to having, the human story and telling an individual story, your story is not as compelling without numbers drive the funders, or without numbers to actually even draw people to connect to an international story. So how do you use numbers to tell a human story that is not rigid?
Yes, I love that. So Gary, results is in our name, results for development. So we're constantly asked the question, how do you measure impact in global development? It's like the $80 million question, right? Hopefully I can answer it worth $1 or so. But I think that the question about metrics and numbers, there's a big controversy, or sort of like big conversation in development circles, maybe about 5 years ago, that said, one camp said, absolutely do not use numbers. Do not say 500 people are dying in Darfur, or 800 million people need life-saving vaccines, because the going thought was that that would dehumanize the issue and people would turn away, because they would say, I cannot make an impact on your issue because it's too much of a scale. And then the other camp said, talk about the one individual. The woman in Maputo, I was just in Jakarta, Indonesia, we were just launching a project last week. Talk about the woman in Indonesia who needs services, or the woman in Accra, Ghana, where I'm from. So I think where we've gone actually is to the right, which is to the tell the personal story. And I would love to piggyback off of what Aaron said about put the credit at the bottom. Tell the story of Maputo or Jakarta and that woman. And as you get to the bottom of the story, if you think about it as an infographic, right? You get to the bottom, then you can talk about the mass, the numbers, the gravity of the situation in terms of the metrics. And that gives you a double-edged sword. And I think there's been a lot of testing of this theory over the past 5 or 6 years. And I think a lot of organizations, and I'd be curious to hear what others on the panel think, but are trying to do a hybrid model, but where you're really highlighting that voice. So make it personal, make it direct, and then give the credit in the end in terms of the big storyline. That would be my.
You.
Okay. My name is Carrie Wilson from the American Chemical Society, and we are struggling to connect with the audience in China. I'm wondering if any of you have any recommendations or success stories about connecting with China.
Well, I can give one example. I was, as I said, just in Asia last week. Indonesia, not China. I think one thing you should think about is cultural awareness. I know that was one of the questions that we were going to talk about. I know that you have some great perspective on that, but understanding how your audience in China wants to be communicated to. I can give you a very stark example. We get off the plane in Indonesia, we're launching a book. We think we're going to pitch the media. We think we're going to call the media and call the Jakarta Post to get our story, get an op-ed, and to invite them. Our local partner told us, absolutely not. Do not call them. We need to physically go to their offices and invite them to the event and explain to them what we're doing. Because in Indonesian culture, calling that's an offensive gesture. So we backed up and we respected, and then it came out to be successful. So I think the headline there is really listening and asking and talking to your counterparts in the region and saying, what are the cultural norms? How do you like to be communicated to? What are how are the interactions between us? How do we make that effective? And what are some of the messages that are important to you culturally? I don't know what the issue is. I think it's energy. I think you mentioned maybe chemical. What are some of the issues that are important to you that we should be following? And if you look at those 4 pieces, I think you'll be successful in your initial engagement, and then for the future.
Paige, Aaron, have you had any challenges or opportunities or success in China specifically?
So the issue of climate change is an issue that we at the UN Foundation work on. It's an issue that everybody, you're all working on it, whether or not you want to talk about it. And it was fascinating for me in the lead up to the summit last year to see how the Chinese media and how people in China talked about it. There was a lot of learning for me personally there as a professional and as an organization. And it comes down to taking cues from the institutions and the people that lead opinion, right? So that's no new science, right? It's rocket science. We all glom onto the person who's the opinion maker, et cetera. But what I thought was really interesting about what happened there was that at the end of the day, I think cross-culturally, and a bunch of us have lived in a bunch of places, right? I think in this room, we've all probably lived all around the world. I've had a chance to live in a couple of great places and learned from a number of amazing cultures. We all love our family. We all want to feel good. We all like hanging out with people who are confident. We all want to look our best. And by look our best, I don't just mean, Kardashian style look our best. I mean, we want to look like we've got it together. And that's a small list. And in the Chinese example, we could filter everything that we were doing into the different institutions, different modalities and projects and media channels. At the end of the day, it was all about family, feeling your best, wanting wanting to look your best and wanting to be around people who you feel are confident in what they're doing, they're confident in their facts, they've got the science, they've got the facts, and they've got something about it that says it connects with their life. So I think that's an overly simplistic thing to say about a massively complicated culture and place and billions of people, but I think that was the learning for me about how they talked about climate. They talked about climate in a very similar way that people did in Cartagena. When we boiled it down to that, we went to different channels, but it came down to those kind of fundamental pulse points.
I have one just question / recommendation from you. I work at the University of Azerbaijan, and they have super problems with the early child marriages. And as a storyteller, I was trying to highlight the problem, but at the same time, you need sponsors. Of course, the sponsor wants credit, and the half of the person goes to the sponsor. So it kind of underestimates the real value of the story about the girl who is struggling, who wants to get education, but the first paragraph goes to, for example, I had a relationship with people. They were our sponsors, but they want half of the person is about them. What is your special recommendation for communication in this case?
So I think that if the question to me, and I think that I feel like everyone on the panel has had this, before, when it comes to child marriage, and I'm glad you raised child marriage, right? Talking about the story, 1 in 5 girls is married before the age of 15. Give me right on that stats, right? Am I right saying? And the Girl Up campaign is a campaign that we at the UN Foundation helped empower, and we love what happens when you get that story out there. I think that if you sometimes bring back to your partner or sponsor how it looks, sometimes you need to say to them, this story is powerful, you're going to lose everybody, and you're going to look, frankly, like less than what you want to be. I was going to say something else. You're going to look like less than you want to be if you are taking the credit, especially when you're talking about something that empowers the person who needs to be empowered. So if you want to empower someone, and the institution or the sponsors giving all the credit up to the beginning, it just looks like they're being tone deaf. So I think you need to sometimes show them here's 2 options. I love it. There's a member of our team, love her. She will come in, and every now and then I'll ask her something, and I got it wrong. And she'll come in and bring it to me and say, here's what you wanted. Now let me show you how it looks if you did it my way. And I think that's a good lesson. You need to do that with sponsors sometimes, and as a boss, I appreciate that she will sometimes just say, okay, I'll shut up. Do it your way. You're wrong. So maybe I think you show them 2 different ways, and they'll come up with the one that's more gracious and a little more impactful. I think at Mom, I know you deal with this, right?
Yeah, well, Carrie, you talk about partnerships. So how do you sort of walk that line where because you want to give them what they want, because you need their help financially or morally, whatever.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you don't bring them to that.
Right. And we've had multiple similar situations where we'll receive logos or verbiage that seems inappropriate for what the story being communicated would be. And we actually take the same approach, and that's how I try to approach it. My last job working for, my boss is, here's what you're asking, here's what we think would be appropriate, why? And we haven't had an issue yet in the past couple years of taking that approach where I think people are reasonable once they understand why. And again, it's a person-to-person relationship at the end of the day that makes those decisions.
Other questions? In the back?
Hi, I'm Margaret Ferry, and first I want to thank WPR for putting this together. I've been working in the field of international communications for 30 years, and when I studied international communications, we were all stepchildren to the policy people, so it's great to see such a distinguished panel of communicators talking about these issues. And I have one comment and one question. And the comment goes to everything that the panel had to say about funders, about stories, and about partnerships. I think it comes down to authenticity, because if the story isn't authentic, if partnership isn't authentic, then people see through that right away. So if Nike has the but a different motivation than the story you're trying to tell about partnership, everyone's going to see that. And it destroys everything you've done up till that point in telling the story. My question has to do with the use of social media, and I work with a lot of international exchange programs, and I work overseas with a lot of programs where there are sensitivities on human rights issues. Someone mentioned China earlier. So I'm curious if any of you have experiences that you can share with harnessing social media. You spoken about how it's been helpful, but there are times when we're also trying to harness it because the people we're dealing with on the ground really are in danger, and in places where it's state controlled and doesn't provide all the benefits it does here to Americans. You're looking at me. No.
Yeah, no, it's a tough question, because when you're working in non-permissive environments, they might be non-permissive because of government control, or in Azerbaijan, there might be certain places that the government doesn't want things going on, and or Russia, they're tracking the media as well. And then you're giving funds to people who are out there and who really don't care. They're happy to be thrown in jail for the cause, but they don't realize the repercussions that would have. So it is hard. You do have to let go, as you were saying, as a communicator. Sometimes you have to let go, and they're going to make their own mistakes. And then you try to set up a social media policy to keep people somewhat contained. There are lots of things that people do in the NGO world with using encryption. But most of those things can be hacked. I mean, obviously everything can be hacked, as we sit in Washington today wondering how much actually has gotten hacked, federal government employee. But I think that sometimes you have to let the string out a little, let the rope out a little bit, and see, and then use that as anecdotal information. It also goes to all of you and sort of where you are in your careers. We just hired a few people at AID, and the first thing one of my colleagues did was go online and find out what their social profile was and how much of it was open. And it was very, it was very telling to see how many of them were smart and then put their privacy settings on, and how many of them were saying things that were really questionable. And although it might not, once they got into the government, I'm sure they would shut those things down. But if that was how they were coming in, you're obviously setting a tone and those things are not gone forever. Just because you might close that account, they'll still be there. So, we have a lot to learn here, because people do just assume you can put it all out there. It's not like a diary underneath your sock drawer anymore. It's out there, and it will be out there forever. And sometimes you just have to see those mistakes be made, so you can use that as anecdotal information as to, you don't want to make this mistake. And that's really more effective, a story to tell to people to try to harness it.
One in the back. Yes.
My name is Carrie Rich. I'm representing Georgia University. I'm a health and strategic communication student there. So my question is about intercultural communication. I know the mindset that there is such a thing as overcompensation for cultural differences. But I was wondering if you agree or not, or if you have any examples.
Do you have an example of it?
Well, I am thinking when you are aware of another culture and you go out of your way, and they're trying to go out of your way, and everyone's just going out of their way, and nobody's understanding each other.
I got a story. So I don't want to answer the question because I tend to do it as well.
Did this happen at Starbucks on the way up?
Yeah, no, not a story. So
we
we were on our way. I can't remember if you were at this meeting or not, so correct me if you keep me honest on it. But we were on our way to meet with some Japanese executives in New York City, and this is a big brand, everyone's in brand. And we're on our way to meet with them, and we had given the team the whole thing about, here's how we're going to do the business cards, and I was a corporate diplomat, and I teach you how to do it. And clearly on the other side in Tokyo, they were having a conversation about, we're going to go meet with these gringos, and they're these crazy Yankees, and they don't know what they're doing, and so here's what you're going to do with your business cards. We got to the table, and all of us do the full-on, right? And they sit down, and they kind of flip the business cards around the table. And I love this is happening on my team as junior members there, and I thought, I'm dispensing wisdom about how you deal with things. And it was a great moment to show that sometimes you don't. But the nice thing about it was that we captured it, and we said, okay, clearly we're trying to connect with one another. And we caught it, they caught us on it. So I don't know if this goes to overcompensating. For example, is the big thing. When I say the Saturday Night Live skit, do you say Guadalajara or do you say Guadalajara? I speak Spanish, and I'm probably not going to say Guadalajara. But the idea in communication, sometimes you got to find the middle ground and find who the messenger is, because it's going to come off weird if you're trying too hard either way. But acknowledging that at least we're trying and we mess up, I love. And I think that Rosetta Stone has done a nice job of that. It's a marketing technique. I don't know who you manage them. Whoever did Rosetta Stones, because they're in that business, whoever did their marketing was brilliant. They kind of celebrate the fact when you're overcompensating, at least you're trying. And there's beauty in that. So I would watch that. I think there's probably a lesson for all of us in development to see how Rosetta Stone did it.
I'm cognizant of time, so I just wanted to do two things before we let you all go on with the rest of your afternoon. We have a project at Edelman that we're working on right now called 100 Lives, and we talked about it earlier. It's a great this is a great commercial, but it's also something that benefits you and your colleagues and clients. Basically, the 100 Lives program is a program set up by last year by an entrepreneur and philanthropist, Armenian guy who made all his money in investment banking and decided he was going to give some of it back to the community. So what he did is he came to us and said, I want to get out there and show gratitude. He's of Armenian descent, so it was the 100th anniversary of the genocide, and they wanted to do something in concert with that. So we came up with this idea of something called the Aurora Prize. And what it is it's going to be given out every year. It's in line with the Nobel Prize. The difference is you have to win the Nobel Prize, or to win the Aurora Prize, you can be nominated by an individual or by an organization, which many of you represent. And the beauty of it is the winner will be chosen based on his or her efforts to make an impact in the humanitarian or human rights area and putting themselves at risk to do so. The winner will get $100,000, but then they get $1 million grant that they can allocate to the organization that inspired them or carries on their spirit. So it's a great cause. And July 1st, we're going to be opening up the nomination process. So people will go online, 100lives.com. It's a great program, and we put together a stellar selection committee with Elie Wiesel and George Clooney as our co-chairs. And yes, George Clooney is as handsome, as charming as you can imagine. He really is. He's a great guy. But we have a short video we want to show you that. And then I have one last question for the panel, which you don't want to take. That's why I said this.
We have millions for the water treasure.
Take this one. Here we go.
We have millions for the water treasure systems of an organized plan called along genocide.
We get so mired down in these horrible stories that sometimes we forget that there were these great heroic moments.
The 100 Lives Grant was developed to honor survivors and saviors, ensuring their stories and spirit remain relevant to impact future generations. With the Armenian Genocide Centennial months away, 100 Lives set out to reawaken the conversation. We adopted the theme, Be Armenian, Be Alive, to highlight the strength and resilience found in us all. 100 Lives formed a strategic partnership with Not On Our Watch, tackling genocide today, and we created the Aurora Prize for Awakening Humanity, whose namesake, Aurora Martigania, was a survivor and outspoken advocate. 3 Nobel laureates joined the selection panel for the $1 million award, honoring individuals who put themselves at risk to enable others to survive and thrive. The award was announced in March, and 100lives.com went live, collecting and showcasing stories and leading a new generation to action. So far, it has generated 855 stories, reaching 600 million. Program milestones include 12.6 million impressions, 10,000 fans in the first 48 hours, 428,000 launch film views, and average daily mentions rising 92%. The program laid the foundation for others to act, and on April 24th, 2015, a 250% increase in conversations year on year, keeping the flame alive, paving the way for the first Aurora Prize recipient in April 2016.
So that's the program, 100lives.com. It's a chance for you to nominate somebody great and maybe get $1 million for your organization as well, which isn't bad, so keep that in mind. So the last question, it's not a question, it's I'd like the panelists, we've been talking about storytelling at an international level And I'd like each one of you to either in one word or one short phrase, Aaron, this will be a piece of cake for you. He probably has 15.
Be Armenian.
Yeah,
Right, that would be allowed.
You got it. He's the winner. Take an extra bottle of water with you. But if you could just in one word or one phrase sort of encapsulate what does it mean to be a good storyteller.
Are we starting here?
We start with you.
Well, actually, I wasn't kidding. Be Armenian. It's easy for me because I am one, right?
All right.
I get to hashtag Be Armenian every day. I didn't know that was coming today. I think the bottom line is ask. If you're a good storyteller, you need to ask what story you're trying to tell and who it is that's in front of you. I think that makes you a better storyteller.
Right.
I would say what I said before, be sincere. I mean, sincerity is just, whether it's multicultural or not, it's felt, it's seen, it's clear when you're sincere about the story you're trying to tell.
I would say have a goal. Have a goal. Is your goal for telling your story policy change? Is it to get that vaccine to that child? If you don't have a goal before you tell your story then doesn't sing.
So particularly for the millennial audience, what we're seeing is it's important to express humility in how we tell our stories.
Well, with that, I want to thank you all for putting up with me, and I want to give a round of applause to the